All right, everyone, and welcome back to the Warwolf Podcast. I'm joined today by my co-host Dale, Stoner, and then we've got a few fellow pilgrims along for the journey. We got Retnav, we got Doctor, and we've got Keck. So we are going to be discussing quite a few things in this, but the overall sentiment of the episode is going to be Europe is shit, and thank God it's burning down. So one of the first topics we're going to be getting into is LIBOR, and the there's been this ongoing discussion for months and months and months. We're going on what was it? Fucking almost a year and a half of 5.5 percent interest rates by the Fed under SOFR, and LIBOR, the London Interbank Options Rating, or options rate, I believe, uh, is the direct competitor to SOFR. And SOFR, resoundingly stomped the shit out of it.
So, for those not in the know in financial markets, can you briefly explain what LIBOR and SOFR are?
Sure. So, the London Interbank Options Rate was the debt index for everybody, basically, across the board, for indexing their debt to. And this program or system, whatever you want to call it, was created by 18 City of London banks. So City of London, the UK, Britain, England, Bank of England, the devils themselves. Also to include the London Bank of one J.P. Morgan Chase. Now, there's a little important factor there that a lot of people might not understand, because then you roll over to SOFR, the Secured Overnight Financing Rate, which is what now everybody indexes their debt in dollars to. Mind you, this is all dollar debt. This is not like euro debt or pound debt or what. This is dollar debt, and it's a global thing. So everybody's indexing across the world on these two systems. Now, of course, LIBOR sunsetted in September of last year and hasn't been a thing since. SOFR is running strong and actually proving to be quite the asset to the world over, because a lot of people last year were talking about, oh, there's a banking crisis in the United States. Oh, the dollar's going to die. Oh, the price of gold is going to do this. Oil's going to do that, et cetera, et cetera.
Just so that everyone knows, where you mentioned how LIBOR is out of the UK. Where did SOFR originate from?
So SOFR originates out of the New York Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve of the United States is broken up into 6 district banks, or regional banks, I guess. District bank is the better word for that. So I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but the ones I do remember are New York, Chicago, St. Louis, or not Chicago, or is it Chicago? No, it's New York, St. Louis, Kansas City, and San Francisco, and then there's a couple others, and I just don't remember where they're at.
Right.
But basically, these are district banks across the United States, intended as lenders of last resort. This is what J.P. Morgan, the railroad baron and future namesake of J.P. Morgan Chase, there's the further connection there, would refer to the Federal Reserve back in 1913, when the Federal Reserve was put up as a system.
Right.
Now, SOFR, one of the important things about SOFR versus LIBOR, and a lot of people are missing this when they discuss, what the dollar is doing, what the euro is doing, what, this country's doing and that country, and et cetera. The main thing that they miss is SOFR versus LIBOR.
And before you get into that, a couple other things, if you could provide information for the audience. Who is currently the head of the Federal Reserve of the United States?
Yes, one Jerome Powell.
And what did he do? Where did he come from before being the head of the Federal Reserve?
So he's originally the head of the New York Federal Reserve.
Right, where SOFR came from, basically.
Yes.
Interesting.
Just to give a little background of Jerome Powell. So Jerome Powell is eighth generation Virginian. The guy he is as American comes. Period. End of story. Per the information that I've seen, he traces his lineage back to the original Jamestown colony. So this guy is salt of the earth Virginian. And not only that, but he basically had started working on, or him and his compatriots, I should say, had started working on SOFR way back in the day. SOFR's been on the shelf for years now. And it was under Obama that it was shelved as a concept, which, anybody who knows anything about Barack Obama understands his connection to City of London and Davos and a few other things there. So there's a lot of interplay here. And as such, SOFR gets shelved, doesn't get to move whatsoever, and then eventually 2017 rolls around and SOFR is allowed to be taken off the shelf again with the appointment of Jerome Powell as FOMC chair. So what ends up happening is as SOFR is put into place, it's a 5 or 6 year rollout. That'd be 6 years. So it was a 6 year rollout of the program, and then LIBOR, as a result, would sunset because the United States was indexing its debt in dollars. Thus, the world's debt in dollars was indexing to SOFR, not LIBOR. And this is what we refer to as seizing monetary policy back from British influence. So, the British no longer control our monetary policy. Our monetary policy is firmly within our grasp rather than being influenced by foreign actors. Which, before we started recording, Stoner was bringing up Alex Jones, and he's talking about all the things that Alex Jones kind of talked about and got right and so on and so forth. And Alex Jones talking about back in the day how there are these people overseas that have control of our monetary policy and our fiscal policy and everything. Alex Jones was correct, but he was aiming his target, or he was aiming his sights in the wrong direction. He was aiming his sights at places like China and that region of the world, and somewhat to Israel. People like to talk about Israel a lot, but in reality, the sights should have been set on the City of London and LIBOR. And LIBOR's been around for a while. I believe it was originally formed back in the 80s, if I remember correctly. So it's been around. So, people have been talking about this issue, but they haven't really knuckled down on this is the problem right here, LIBOR.
Right.
So what you end up having as things go on, LIBOR's sunsetted, SOFR rises, SOFR determines the indexing of debt via dollars, and then now the U.S. actually has control of its monetary policy. Now, this is different from fiscal policy. People might think the interplay between monetary and fiscal being, the same, but they're not. They're actually two totally different things. Monetary policy is you're determining what the money does and how the money is created and kind of how it comes to be, whereas the fiscal policy is how the money is used. So in the case of the Treasury Department, formerly chaired by Janet Yellen, the mushroom head trader that she is, which honestly speaking, go look up a picture of Janet Yellen. Like just pull up a picture of her, please, in the recording, and she looks like she has a mushroom head. Like, it's hilarious. The first time I heard Tom say that, I was fucking rolling. I was like, holy shit. Okay. It's also another way to call her a dickhead, and it's great. But the fact of the matter is that Janet Yellen has been an ally of I won't say she's an ally of Davos. She definitively is an ally of the British, and if you do the Venn diagram, you know, the Bank of England or the British government or whatever group you want to knuckle down on in the UK, and hell, honestly, City of London is probably a better way to say it.
Probably.
Let's use that, City of London. If you do a Venn diagram of City of London and Davos, there are a lot of differences, a lot of different perspectives that they have on certain issues, but there is a lot of interplay between the two. The Venn diagram is not, skimp. Let's just say that.
Mhm.
And thus, she wasn't necessarily an ally to Davos, but she wasn't an enemy of Davos either by any metric. And so these two groups got benefit from very shitty U.S. fiscal policy for years. And we're, look at the look at the national debt situation. It's kind of bad. Now, one of the things, another thing that I'd like to bring up is a lot of people they talk about the Chinese when it comes to U.S. national debt. Yes, the Chinese do control a sizable chunk of U.S. national debt, but it's only 830 billion last time I checked, and it might even be lower at this point in time because they were selling off our national debt. Period. In the story. The majority of our national debt is owned by Europe.
Right.
A lot of it is European. So, across the board, again, like we keep setting our sights in the East, but it's like, no, your sights should be set on the West. And I guess the biggest thing to explain to people is that the US is not a Western country by any metric. We're not. We are an American country. The New World is not the Old World. And this is something that a lot of people need to kind of try to understand, is that if you keep viewing yourself from a European mindset, from a European point of view, you're going to fail yourself every single time because you're not European, you're American. And as such, the two worlds are diametrically opposed. And it's really telling at this point in time when you really knuckle down and you get into the details and you start figuring out who's doing what, who's saying what, and who knows who, and so on and so on. You start realizing that Europe has a lot more to gain from our downfall than China does. And in reality, China suffers from our downfall because then it leaves them open to interplay from the Europeans. So, um,
By
yeah,
the I hate to interrupt, but by the
go ahead.
Europeans, are we specifically talking about the European Union led by the Federal Republic of Germany and the French Republic?
So, okay,
Because the Europeans, and I hate to be that guy, but the Europeans are not really a singular force. So when I think of the Europeans, I'm not sure if you mean the French, the Germans, or hell, even the
okay,
British.
and you know what? I'll get into that and knuckle on that for you a little bit. So it's a little bit of both, really. It's the individual sovereign nations and it's the EU itself. So, for example, the Germans, um, for example, politically speaking, the Germans benefit from a good relationship with Russia. They always have. If you go back to, say, for example, the American Revolution, when there were concerns of the British and the French intervening on behalf of the Confederacy, the Russian nation was the nation that said, if you go to war against the Americans, we're declaring war on you. And this is actually the main thing that prevented the British and French from coming in to aid the Confederacy, because they didn't want to try to fight a war against the Russians, which at the time the Russians were as powerful as the two nations combined, because Britain had basically the same navy as the Russians, and the French, their navy was kind of lacking at that time period. And then in the case of the land armies, the British land army was severely lacking. And then the French army was quite good, but it wasn't going to be able to fight the Russians toe to toe especially given the fact that the Germans, because at the time, you have the Prussian state, and the Prussian state basically, controls the northern half of what is now Germany. The Prussians basically gave the pass to the Russians, saying, "Hey, look, if you're going to want to declare war on them, that's cool. Here are the routes that we want you to take through our lands. You stay on those routes, and you can go fuck up the French as much as you want." Because the Germans benefit from a weak France. They always have. The Germans benefit from a strong Russia and a weak France. Whereas the British, for example, and the French benefit from a weak Germany and weak Russia. And so this is what has kind of forced the Avigan the Avigan Empire. Is that what it's called? I forget. I forget how to say it exactly, but it's this concept from way back in the fucking day. We're talking, prior to the 100 Years' War, basically. The merging of Britain and France into one state, into one empire. And, these two have, even though they've clashed over the years, if you notice, there's a lot of interplay between the two governments now because they realize, like, hey, we have to work together. If we don't work together, we're fucked. And they've realized this for the past 100 or so years, and that's why they've had such close relationships for so long. Notice how the British, the only time that they've really liked the Germans, and even then they really didn't like the Germans all that much, was when Queen Victoria was on the throne of Britain, and you remember she's German.
Right.
So there's a lot of interplay going on between the individual sovereign nations. And then you have the EU. And the EU, it wants to create, the one world government kind of thing. It wants to, one world government, one world central bank, one world fucking mentality, because they view themselves, the EU, the European, the Unionists, let's call them that, the Unionists. The Unionists view themselves as superior above all else. They're like, oh, we don't see borders. We don't care about borders. We care about taking care of people, yada, yada, all the platitudes, all the bullshit.
You will eat the bugs.
And this is where a lot of Davos's influence lies. So the British, the reason why Brexit happened was because the British have always viewed themselves as not necessarily European. They've always kind of, it's kind of like with the Scandinavians. The Scandinavians have always kind of viewed themselves as separate from Europe to a degree. The British are the same way. They've always kind of viewed themselves separate from Europe. And so there's a lot of moving pieces in the background that a lot of people don't identify because, they might not be as involved in politics or be involved with learning about this stuff and so on and so forth. But if you really start knuckling down and start looking into it, you start realizing, like, oh, hey, there's a lot of incentive, for example, getting rid of, or getting everybody hooked on the Paris Climate Accords, for example, forcing people away from oil and coal and all this. It brings everybody to a level playing field. Because now everybody is just as weak as the other guy, and so then any power that can, leverage that balance, which the British are exceptionally good at. This is how they maintain their empire for so long. I give you the best example, India. India, their whole game in India, because they knew they couldn't fight and win in India, but what they did was they leveraged the power balance between the different Rajas against each other in order to be able to maintain their power structure within India. And, the Brits are exceptionally good at this shit. And so that's where you kind of have the crossing of the Venn diagram between the Brits and the EU, is that the Brits, they love this idea because, energy resources, the number one resource that everybody fucking needs to have an abundance of in order to be a successful economy. The Europeans don't have a lot.
Correct.
To begin with, and the Brits are exceptionally lacking. Basically the Brits, the only energy resources the Brits have are oil, or not oil, natural gas, and that's off the coast. So, coastal natural gas, which is not easy to defend by any metric. And then also wind and hydro.
Don't
Those are
they
the only.
also have a lot of coal?
No, they don't. They actually, their coal resources are actually quite limited.
Oh.
Yeah, the only sizable source of coal in Europe as a whole is in Germany and Czechoslovakia. And I just pissed off all the Czechs and all the Slovakians because I used the old fucking name because, yeah, guess what? You're both the same fucking group of people. Sorry, I've met my stepfather's Slovak, you fucking assholes. You're all the fucking same. You just live in different parts. Fuck off.
All Europeans are the same.
Don't let them hear you say that.
You want me to say it louder?
But anyways, the point is that so the whole thing is that it's a little bit of both. The very long-winded explanation of it's a little bit of both. It's both the individual sovereign states and the EU that are all doing things to try to get a leg up. The Germans are trying to get a leg up within the EU and within Europe in order to be able to rebuild their power base. And then the French and the English are trying to, do their thing. And then the EU's trying, Brussels is trying to do their thing, and so on and so forth. Like, everybody's trying to do something all at the same time. And this is what makes it such a tricky web to try to cut through, because everybody's doing something. I hope that at least gives you some, semblance of context, Doctor.
It's a large topic.
Oh yeah, it's a very expansive topic, and that's why I would like to reference our favorite sailor, or Bubblehead. Let's call him Bubblehead. Let's put a little more respect on his name. It's kind of like working submarines. Submarines are a very complex thing. Period. End of story. One of the most dangerous warfighting vehicles ever devised. Not only is it incredibly stealthy, but it's also incredibly complex and dangerous to use. Like, the fatality rates are near 100% when it comes to submariners. And it's kind of like that. Like, getting into this topic and actually diving deep into it is like going under the ocean and trying to find shit. It's that dangerous. Ocean Gate, the whole fucking submarine decompressing and imploding on itself. Yeah, that's what you got here. Like, that's how dangerous this topic is, because there's so much shit going on. You're gonna get lost if you don't know where you're looking.
Yeah. So now that we've covered just the general nefariousness of the Europeans, let's go into what the current state of Europe, financially speaking. So
you're
a dumpster fire.
Yeah. What financial state? So let's start from LIBOR, since we were covering that topic. So LIBOR was a huge fucking money maker for the city of London. Mm-hmm. It was a large 18 City of London banks, including J.P. Morgan Chase's London branch. Now you might think, a lot of people might be like, okay, why is he specifically saying J.P. Morgan's London branch? Because J.P. Morgan's London branch is not seen as a distinct part of the J.P. Morgan Chase brand. It's its own, in most ways, it's its own entity within the world. And Jamie Dimon, the current CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, fucking despises them. He fucking hates them. Like, I've seen some whispers that basically if he could get rid of that bank, he would. That's how much he despises them. Because they do a lot of shady ass shit underneath the whole facade of commercial banking. And that's what the Europeans are really targeting, is commercial banking. They fucking hate commercial banking. They think commercial banking is the source of all evil in the world, when in reality it's central banking that is the source of evil in all the world.
Correct. And that's the type of banking the Europeans like.
Yes, they basically almost exclusively central banking across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Well, remember the Bank of England is the oldest bank in the world, and most of the European countries adopted a similar model. Note which country did not adopt that model until after they were defeated twice in warfare.
Germany.
Yes, Germany. Germany actually adopted the banking system that the Hanseatic League had,
What was
whereas
that?
the it was a primitive form of commercial banking. The banks, the Hansa banks would loan money out to people so they could start businesses and do different things and pursue enterprise, and thus the return on the money to the Hansa was incredible. And this is what made the Hansa such a power to be reckoned with during their time. Now, eventually they would be subsumed, but their banking system would live on past the fall of the league, because everybody identified like, hey, this is the way to do this. And thus Germany would have this, this banking system up until the 20th century for the most part. And then, you look at the overall financial system, or the overall financial situation that the world was in. You go back to, the beginning of World War One, prior to World War One, let's say. And you had two marks, two Deutschmarks. You had a silver mark and a gold mark in Germany. They had a dual currency system. So one currency was pegged to the price of gold, the other one was pegged to the price of silver. And thus you had a situation where the German currency was one of the most stable and one of the most liquid of all the currencies in the world. Even the US dollar was not nearly as liquid as the German mark at that time period. Now, the US would eventually get to that point, but it took time. Basically, literally the 1890s is kind of the nexus point for all this. It's kind of funny because, me and Mitch, are you actually here, by the way?
Yep.
Oh, hey, you beautiful bastard. I love you. One of the games that me and Mitch really like to play called Ultimate Hammer Dreadnoughts, it starts in 1890. And it's actually really funny because you kind of get to see this in the game where everybody's economy, the Brits have the biggest economy at the beginning. The French, they're right behind them. The Americans, they've got a decent sized economy, but it's not quite that big. And, but America has this amazing growth potential. Where it just balloons like a motherfucker over the course of the game. And all of a sudden, the Americans are just coming on the map and just like, "Argh! We're here to fucking eat you all," and shit like that. And it's just fucking amazing to watch. And real life, art imitates life. This is what happened with the United States. The United States took its commercial banking system and just fucking imploded on the map and said, we'll take that, we'll take that, we'll take that, that's ours, that's ours. Hey, we'll take a little bit of that on the side. And, again, the U.S., as I said earlier, it's one of the most diverse economies in the world. Me and Stoner were in a conversation last night. It's one of the most diverse economies in the world overall, whereas the Europeans, not so much.
Well, I would also even add on to this as well. What I would add is part of the success of the United States in the 20th century is because the Europeans kind of cucked themselves with World War II, and the United States was allowed to basically pick up the scraps of the French and the British Empire and power vacuum in Western Europe, and of course Asia.
So here's the thing. That is actually a myth. There's some truth within the myth, but it's actually more myth than anything.
That
Um,
isn't to say that beforehand the United States was not already becoming an industrial power because it was on the other side of the ocean and was allowed to freely develop without any like power, like really messing with it.
well, yes, you are correct in that regard. But here's what I'll lay down for you. So in 1918, we have the end of World War One and the signing of Versailles. Versailles levied immense reparations on the German state across the board. The, as I explained to Stoner the other night, um, Versailles was supposed to be this, the peace treaty, I should say, was supposed to be a two-way thing. It was supposed to be part British, part French. And the British were a little more hesitant to be like hyper aggressive with the peace treaty because they didn't want to upset the balance. Again, they like to play this balancing game. Whereas the French were fucking out for blood. And Versailles ended up being more the French solution than the British solution. And this actually set up what would eventually become World War II.
Didn't the
So,
American president at this time even basically warn the French not to be too hard because it would piss off the Germans and get them wanting revenge?
uh, to a degree, but you know, uh, fuck, what was his name?
Woodrow
The
Wilson.
guy, not, yeah, Wilson. Sorry, um, Wilson. On the reason why he was warning the French was because he was such. Wilson comes from the British school of thought when it comes to politics and whatnot, and you actually look into him a little more, him and Hoover, and you realize really quickly, like, oh, these two guys are literally just British agents, basically. Like that's how they ran things, is that they ran things in accordance to British policy. So it's kind of a weird situation with Wilson. But what ends up happening is, I believe it was 1921. I want to say was when we had the issuing of the Dow's bonds, and the Dow's bonds were basically so, in the order of reparations, or debt payments. Let's call them that, debt payments. So the Germans would pay the French would pay the Brits would pay the Americans, because this is the order in which people borrowed money from each other. And so the French were being hyper aggressive about these reparation payments, and the Germans just weren't able to keep up with it. And the French were relying on those reparation payments to pay back the Brits, and then the Brits were relying on those debt payments from the French to pay back the Americans. And so a senator, I forget his name off the top of my head. Actually, let me actually let me pull his name up real quick so I actually know who the fuck the guy is. I thought he was a senator. Um, okay, I might be misspelling the name, but this senator or representative or whoever the fuck it was, um, Dow's bonds, the Dow's bonds were paid to the Germans in order to help kickstart the German economy. Thus, the Germans would be able to pay back the French would be able to pay back the Brits, and the Brits would be able to pay back the Americans. Well, what ends up happening is in 1924, or it was either 23 or 24, I don't remember which year, you have a one Winston Churchill decide to fuck around. And what Winston Churchill did was he repegged the pound to gold at pre-war prices. And this destroyed the value of everything, basically. It just completely, it overinflated the cost of the pound, it destroyed the value of the Deutschmark, and it just made it impossible for the Germans in order to be able to make reparation payments. And on top of that, screwed everybody within the chain. The Brits benefiting slightly from this, but the benefit was more long-term than short-term. The point being is that, then comes the 1924 scare. And 1924, if you're not aware, there was a huge market scare. Everybody freaked the fuck out, thinking that the market was going down and that everything was going to crash. It doesn't, but it sent a ripple through time, effectively, because, in the market, time is money. It sends a ripple through time that would eventually come due in 1929 with the stock market crash of 29, leading to what we call the Great Depression here in the United States.
Mhm.
I
And
hate to interrupt, but I believe I must be going right now. Something has just turned up, but it was a very much an honor to be here today.
hey, well,
Happy to have
it's all
you.
good, man. It was good to have you. We'll talk to you later then.
Have a good evening, folks.
Have a good
Bye.
night. So, what you end up having is that these Dow's bonds blow up in the Americans' face. We're not getting the debt payments from the Brits because the Brits aren't getting the money from the French because the French aren't getting the money from the Germans, and of course, again, leads to the Great Depression. And then fast forward, we all know the history from there, the rise of the Nationalist Socialists, which then leads to World War II. So in effect, ladies and gentlemen, you can blame Winston Churchill for causing World War II.
Yes.
which is fucking diabolical, especially and mind you, that one interview that Tucker Carlson did with that one guy that basically shat all over fucking Winston Churchill. I haven't watched that interview,
It was pretty
and
good.
I really, the more I learn about Winston Churchill, the more I'm like, okay, I need to go watch this interview just to see what the guy has to say so I can cross-reference with all the sources I have and just be like, oh yeah, okay, he's right on that, but he's kind of wrong on that, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, no, Winston Churchill was the bad guy of this story. He was. When it came to the financial world, Winston Churchill was the bad guy. Period in the story. And this all culminates eventually into the Bretton Woods agreements, which then leads to the Marshall Plan, or the Marshall Plan leading into the Bretton Woods Agreement, which then leads into eventually the U.S. becoming the poster child for the Western world, quote unquote, which again, we're not part of the West, even though people want to claim we are, we're not. And eventually it just spirals and spirals and spirals until we get to the into the late 60s, early 70s, and the United States has gone bankrupt. And mind you, a lot of people have this idea that the U.S. won against the USSR. No, 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 no. Both nation states went bankrupt at the same time. It's just the U.S. was able to hide it through one action and one action only.
Are you referring to going off the gold standard by Nixon?
Yes. Going off the gold standard allowed us to expand the money supply that allowed us to conceal the actual bankruptcy that the United States had gone through. Now, this wasn't a traditional bankruptcy, just like how it wasn't a traditional bankruptcy in the USSR. A lot of people claim that the USSR went bankrupt in 1991. No, the Russian people said, we're not giving you tax money anymore. That's what caused the fall of the USSR, was the Russian people saying, we don't feel like paying you tax money anymore because we don't want to be a part of the Union anymore. Now, mind you, I will also point this out, the USSR was actually, funny enough, the test bed for the idea of the European Union. Because if you have read the book Pan-Europa, which I've only gotten about halfway through it, but you look at what the guy was saying throughout the entire thing, and you realize really quickly, like, yeah, communism was the only way that the fucking shit was going to work. The only way it was going to work. And, well, look at what's happened. The EU, it was created under a socialist ideology, and it still failed. Or is failing, I should say. It hasn't failed completely yet. Dear God, I can't wait until the 2030s. The 2030s are going to be great, by the way.
All right. So, mentioning the 2030s, in what ways is actually, let's go back to the financial topic. What was Janet Yellen doing to support the EU that she's now no longer able to do? now that she's out at the Treasury.
Yeah, so what Janet Yellen was doing was issuing T-bills. So T-bills are you know, everybody knows what a bond is.
Yes.
But T-bills are particular because they're 3, 6, and 12-month bills. Um, and so T-bills are, these short-term bonds that they come due very quickly. And then you have bonds, which are 2 to 30 year, basically. And most of the market, when it comes to bonds, they buy within the 2 to 10 year segment.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you end up having is that Janet Yellen, how she was affecting everything across the board was issuing a shit ton of T-bills. And she was just issuing a crap load of fucking short-term debt.
All right.
And it was meant to put pressure on Jerome Powell to drop interest rates. Because the interest rates, and I can't really explain it fully because I unfortunately I'm still trying to learn all the different, terminologies and a few other things like that. But in essence, what happened is you have the US Fed is, with these higher interest rates, is sucking money, dollars specifically, is sucking dollars back into the United States and removing it from the US dollar supply of the world. And thus, I believe it's called the reverse repo facility.
Yeah,
what it's called.
Correct.
And so the Fed is just sucking all these dollars back into the United States from across the globe, and it puts a squeeze on the remaining dollars in the market, making them of higher value. This is why one of the many reasons why the euro and the dollar have almost reached parity. Mm-hmm. Because now, there's less dollars within the market, there's less available liquidity, and so the euro has to come down in order to obtain, near parity in order to be able to actually make transactions. And Yellen was disrupting this by issuing all this short-term debt to try to force money back into the global market, but it wasn't working. Jerome Powell held steady, and then the election, which we all know what happened with the election.
Yes.
The big orange baby is back in office, and no one puts baby in a corner. But yeah, so across the board, this is the financial system is slowly but surely coming back within the grasp of the United States. The U.S. financial system, I should say, is coming back within the grips of the United States, and we're not going to be letting go anytime soon.
Right. And what is that currently doing to the European financial system?
Okay, so well, as I just said, the euro is finally is near reaching parity with the US dollar.
Right.
But this isn't the only thing hurting the European Union, because you also have to look at trade flows. So in order for the euro to actually be relevant and actually be a currency, it has to be used. Well, the problem is that prior to 2022, 30% of European trade flows were done in euros.
Right.
After 2022, that trade flow reduced to 11%, which is a huge knock-on. Like, if you actually look at the charts, you can see the drop in the value of the euro once and I'm particularly referring to the sanctions against Russia due to their intervention in Ukraine. You can see the drop-off that occurs in that time period with the euro. Now, the euro has been collapsing for years now. If I remember correctly, at one point in time, it was like 145 or something like that to the dollar.
Yeah.
Which was hyperly overvalued. That's like pound levels of overvaluation. So, lots and lots of economic downturn from just the value of the euro going down. But then also you have the decrease in uh, decrease in overall trade flows, because now that the Europeans are not buying oil and gas and other natural resources from the Russians due to the sanctions, they're having to buy it from other places. Well, you know, Russian pipeline gas and pipeline oil is trading at, $78. The Russians, they like oil around the I believe it's the 78 or $74 mark, somewhere in that region. It's in that uh, area. And then gas, I don't remember that one right off the top of my head. I know it's lower than the United States, but the U.S. doesn't trade in pipeline gas. They trade it in LNG, or liquefied natural gas, which, if you know anything about LNG, you also understand that you need to have specialized facilities to be able to receive LNG. So across the board, the Europeans kneecap themselves by basically saying, "Oh, we're not going to buy anything from the Russians anymore." And then all of a sudden, the European economy ground to a fucking halt. And then they started buying stuff from the Russians again.
Yeah. Just
But
through
they were
intermediaries like India.
Yes, they were doing it through intermediaries. For example, prior to Finland joining NATO, Finland was a source for it was an intermediary for a lot of natural resources. India was an intermediary for oil and gas, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, again, the amount of gas and oil that they were able to buy from the Russians was severely handicapped versus what they can buy from the United States, for example. The U.S. only has a certain amount of production under the former regime, only had a certain amount of production, and most of that production was going overseas to Asia, to Japan, South Korea, and so on and so forth. And so the Europeans were getting second dibs on whatever was left. And so the Europeans were, again, they, financially, they're very hamstrung, like across the board. Now, something else I should point out as well is the pound euro equation. So one of the things that a lot of people will talk about Brexit, and they're like, "Oh, Brexit was a terrible idea. The British should have never done it." Well, the only reason why it was a terrible idea and the British should have never done it was because the British were kneecapped by the EU. Because the EU is basically like a mob family. You can get in, but you can't get out. And the Europeans had done several key moves in order to get rid of key figures within the movement. So, like, Nigel Farage was a bitch and wasn't willing to see it through. He got the vote through and then bailed. Theresa May, who had put in an austerity budget that was working for the British government. Mind you, the British government was actually in a pretty good place under Theresa May. They got rid of her because, they needed to be able to expand the budget so they could balloon everything and, create the wonkiness within the British economy in order to create the turmoil that Britain is currently under. And mind you, the average person isn't going to feel these things. The average person isn't going to notice this stuff. This is third and fourth order effect stuff. This is, the high level businesses. This is your international trade. This is, the banks and so on and so forth. This is way above the average person across the board. So the average person is going to be like, but everything's fine. And it's like, yeah, it's fine for you for now, because everything is still churning as it should. But what happens in 5, 10, 15 years when all the bills come due? And that's what a lot of people are starting to identify now, for example, in the case of Brexit, where Brexit's official in 2026. They did a slow rollout of Brexit. I believe it was a 10-year rollout or something like that, or an 8-year rollout, whatever it was. It was a slow rollout of the whole thing, and in 2026 it's official. Well, Britain needs to figure out its trade flows before 2026. Now, if I were Trump, for example, I would be using this to my advantage. I would look at the British and be like, okay, here's what you're going to be, here's the offer. And if the Brits don't take it, they're fucked because they can't do anything otherwise. And they can't rejoin the EU because then that's going to make them look real bad. But they can't trade normally with the EU because of the bad blood that's currently there. And so they're going to have to accept whatever offer the United States lays at their feet, and that offer is not going to be generous by any metric. Which then also plays into the whole Canada and Greenland thing that a lot of people are talking about currently. So there's a lot of distinct things in other countries, like for example France, or not France. Sorry, France comes to mind because the farmer protests there are so televised. But the Netherlands, I meant the Netherlands. With the farmer protests, a lot of people are like, oh, they're trying to confiscate land to do this, to do that, and what a lot of people actually don't know is if they actually look at the map and look at where the land confiscation actually is due to take place, most of it is in Friesland, which Friesland is the northern portion of the Netherlands. Oh, by the way, this is where all the natural gas in the Netherlands is.
Interesting.
The reason why they want to do the land confiscation is to be able to actually tap those natural resources, because when they were previously tapping those natural resources back in the day, there was a lot of seismic activity that was actually destroying people's homes. And so they had to freeze all development of those gas fields until eventually now they're trying to force people out of their homes by doing land confiscation under the guise of climate change and stuff like that. And the farmers, mind you, there's a bunch of farmers in Friesland as well. They're caught up in this, and the farmers, thankfully, went hog fucking wild and started spraying pig shit all over the place, and it's fucking glorious.
Yes. So that's interesting. I actually had no idea that the whole climate change thing was just a psyop for them. I thought they were true believers in the whole we need to kill all the cows to stop them farming.
So the climate change as a thing, as a system, is literally meant as a put everybody on the same playing field. But that's from the Davos EU perspective. So like here in the United States, for example, climate change has kind of a different thing to it. Here we kind of have this mentality of, oh, we have to clean the rivers up, we have to replant the forests, we have to do this, we have to do that, et cetera, et cetera. We're a lot more hands-on with it because we don't have a lot of the individual families. For example, Greta Thunberg's family, who is heavily invested in alternative energy, specifically wind and solar. We don't have that here in the U.S. For example, what was that government subsidized company that Obama tried to spin up? Solyndra. Solyndra. Shovel ready. That whole fucking fiasco back in the day.
Oh, yes.
Solyndra was a alternative energy project that was being spun up by the government, and that was because Obama traces more to Davos than anything. It was his attempt to basically create the same kind of climate change attitude that's over in Europe to here in the US, whereas we notice how Solyndra failed like it did because you can't just prop up a shell company. A shell company is a shell company for a reason. So there's two very distinct dichotomies when it comes to climate change attitude overall between Europe and the US, and it's kind of weird. Like honestly speaking, listening to Europeans talk about climate change and then listening to Americans talk about climate change, it's a weird fucking ride. It's like fucking taking acid. It's like, whoa, okay, what the fuck is going on? So kind of a fun ride. So, but that's the essence of climate change in Europe is, get everybody on the equal playing field across the board and then be able to take advantage of things, in secret. Like, again, the Netherlands with their natural gas, the natural gas off the coast of England, or I believe it's off the coast of Scotland actually, but
Yeah, Scotland.
but yeah, there's several key things there.
So they're just using the true believers, and they think the people that think the world's actually going to end in 10 years. They're just using them as cover.
Well,
Or as useful
no.
idiots.
So here's the fun part, and we've kind of gotten into it a little bit, but the world could potentially end in 10 years,
Right, but
15
not from,
years, 20 years.
Not
from climate
CO2.
change.
Yes.
No, not from climate change. Carbon isn't going to kill you. Solar radiation's going to kill you, but that's a totally different topic.
Yeah.
Mitch knows a lot about radiation.
I would assume so.
Hey, Mitch, how's the third arm feeling?
Well,
Oh wait, no, it's his malformed third leg.
you've been peeking in my window.
Hey, you know what? I called you a beautiful bastard, and how much I love having gotten to meet you, and Poe just she keeps going like, you're not beating the allegations.
I'm the one peeking in his window. But I don't peek and tell.
Oh, I figured he probably liked to watch. Yeah.
So
No, that's me.
I actually do want to get into a little bit of a side topic in regards to Europe, and that is actually the European army thing.
Mhm.
So we're gonna kind of step away from the financial stuff. We're gonna start talking about some of the more culture / politics that are currently going on. And have you guys, like Mitch? I know for a fact you've kind of seen some of the European military bullshit that they've been trying to spin up. I don't think Dale has really seen any of that, and Stoner I know for sure has seen it because he's been fucking bombarding me. And then Poe is just here for the ride, I guess.
What have they been doing?
Well, Mitch, I'll let you comment first because I think you might have some fun with dragging the British a little bit for this, since you worked with them as much as you did.
Oh Lord. Well, you just basically the British military right now is like a chihuahua. A lot of bark and no bite. Where, like you heard some of the references, like you could fit the entire British military inside a soccer stadium. Yes, you literally could right now.
Yeah, around 50. Actually, no. Actually, the revised numbers that I saw was pegged at around 43,000 active personnel.
Damn.
Yeah. Everything. Army, Navy, and Air Force.
Do they have a large force of like reserves that they could in theory call upon, or?
Not really. I think their reserve counts somewhere around like 16,000 or something like that.
Damn.
Let's put it this way. They were in such disparate shape for about 2 years ago when the admiral that was in charge of their submarine force went to retire. They had to put an advertisement on LinkedIn advertising for someone who wanted to be promoted to be in charge of the Royal Navy submarine force.
Wait.
We did not have anyone qualified that was still on active duty in the Royal Navy to assume command of it.
It's insane.
Wait. They put an ad on Indeed. They actually did that.
That's
Honest to
insane.
God.
Holy shit, that's fucking hilarious.
They're just gonna promote some civilian immediately to general. That's
Or whatever, but
interesting.
they could not. they were so short on personnel, ran everyone off. So when the one admiral that was a qualified submariner decided to retire, they did not. But literally, it was so short on personnel, they could not find anyone that was qualified or anyone that was qualified that was willing to take the job.
That is fucking hilarious. Holy shit.
That is.
And mind you, this tale with the British is not limited to the British. The French are in similar states. The Germans are in similar states. The Spanish, the Italians. Well, actually, the Italians. I'll give the Italians a little bit of credit because they actually maintain a pretty high level of readiness across the board, and they have a small military, but it's a good military.
Really?
They're the Italians, funny enough, have kind of occupied the position that the Swedes had during World War II, where they had a small military, the Swedes, but it was such of a quality that nobody wanted to fuck with them. And that's why they were able to maintain their neutrality during the war, is because nobody was willing to bite the bullet to take them on.
Right. Well, hasn't that kind of always been the case with Sweden? They've always kind of punched well above their weight class.
Well, that's the problem. Is in the modern day, they're in again, it's almost universal across Europe. You know, Sweden's is just, you know, Sweden, Finland, Norway. They're all within, like, and mind you, you know, I'm not saying that these countries don't have like good tier 1 operators. They all have their tier 1 operators. But what we're talking about are the general line troops, the guys that are actually going to be doing the mainline fighting. They just don't have the forces. So right now they're pushing this idea of the European army, you know, the EU, you know, mind you, they failed to push through direct taxation under the EU. So so this is kind of what gives legitimacy, quote unquote, to a nation, is their ability to tax their citizens. This is it's kind of a flawed metric to determine a nation, but you know this is my somewhat more libertarian mind coming to play. But you know that's because I prefer levies over taxes. I want my people to vote on it rather than being told at gunpoint that you have to pay. But, you know, the EU was like, oh, hey, we want to put in the digital euro, and then we want to be able to tax member states' citizens and yada, yada, yada. And that fell so flat, it was unfucking real. And mind you, this isn't the first time the EU has tried to create a unified military force. I believe the first time they attempted it was back in the 80s. When West Germany officially basically gained the ability to have their own independent military. A lot of people might be like, oh, but the Bundeswehr was around, yeah, as basically like a fucking glorified police force. Like that's what the Bundeswehr was for a long fucking time. But in the 80s, we basically allowed the Germans to be able to actually recruit a military, finally. And, you know, they tried doing it in the 80s, it failed. They tried doing it in the 90s, it failed. They tried doing it in the early 2000s, it failed. You know, they've tried the same thing multiple times, you know. I think you guys understand what that's the definition of, but, you know, It is what it is.
Did it fail because no one just signed up? Or, like, because generally when you think of Germany, you think of pretty militarily competent.
Well,
or at least when you think of Prussia, that's what you think of.
Yeah. The Prussian blood has been drained pretty hard from Germany. No, the problem is that the EU doesn't have any legitimacy, and so every time the negotiations and all the talks around the subject have come about, it's kind of fallen flat because nobody really looks at the EU as a legitimate government. You know, let's face it, like the people themselves, if they understood, like, you have a plutocratic fucking oligarchy, you know, controlling you, you know, a council You know, like, oh yeah, you vote the EU Parliament in, but then the EU Parliament appoints the EU Council, which then the EU Council they're all appointed, but they get the final say over the Parliament. So it's a case of like nobody, like, as I've talked to Europeans that I actually like, scary thought. A lot of them, they don't like the EU because they're like, well, why would I fucking give them any more power than they have? Like, that's kind of the mentality that a lot of people have. But with this new round of talking about forming an EU army, they're talking about putting 100,000 troops in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can say is, well, Mitch, our favorite Fred, Fab 500, would like to have a discussion.
Exactly. Not to mention Mr. Reznik as well.
Oh, no, Madam Orezhnik.
Yeah.
Madam Orezhnik.
Yeah. Like
please, treat
in the
treat
Russian
her well.
translation of that is like hazelnuts. The Russians basically be saying, "Here, how do you like these nuts?" But one other thing also, after the end of the Cold War, which we did some severe cutbacks, like in '91 and '92, and basically we're kicking a bunch of people out of the military, try to quote unquote take advantage of the peace dividend. The Europeans went hog wild on that and cut back their own military severely. Like just before the start of the Ukraine war, the past few years, you mentioned the Bundeswehr. Basically, they had gotten to the point to where they'd cut back on the money for the Bundeswehr so severely that when they went out on a training exercise to simulate having a machine gun on their vehicles, they were having to take broomsticks and paint them black.
Really?
And mount them on the top of the vehicles
What the
to
fuck?
simulate machine guns.
What the actual fuck is wrong with Germany?
And
Just Europe in
either
general.
put all their tanks in warehouses or got rid of them.
Oh, well, I actually have a really fun tank story. So you know the Challenger 2, right?
Yeah.
So the power plant, or the power pack as it's referred to, the power pack of the Challenger 2 was developed and produced by Rolls-Royce, right?
Mhm.
And then the gun, the 120 mil, I don't remember its designation off the top of my head, was developed by Royal Ordnance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd say about now 9 years ago, the Challenger 2s were due for an upgrade because they need to have their their gun systems redone. They need to have their power packs redone. They just need an overhaul. Just make sure they're up to snuff. Problem: the British government sold Rolls-Royce and Royal Ordnance to Rheinmetall. So they had to go to Rheinmetall to do the refurbs on their Challenger 2s, and then they only ended up refurbing like 50 of them because they were like, this is prohibitively expensive. And so there's like, I think it's something like half or more of the Challenger fleet currently, quote unquote, in service is combat ineffective because they need updates on their systems so badly that they don't trust the systems from safety perspectives.
And then you've also got the nice little added benefit of the ammunition for the main gun, which it's been so long since they produced any of it. When they started talking about giving them to Ukraine, they found out, oh, nearly all the ammunition for the main gun on their Challenger 2s are past this expiration date.
Yep, they're all duds.
And on top of that, you've seen, the pictures or videos of like personnel inside, the American or Soviet tanks when or like especially American tanks, it's a one-piece shell. You've got the, basically the shell and propellant case. It's all one piece.
Yeah, it looks like a big rifle cartridge.
Big rifle cartridge. The 120 millimeter gun, gun that the British developed to use on Challenger tanks uses a separate charge like an old-fashioned artillery gun. You slide the shell in. It's like loading a 16-inch gun on an Iowa class. You ram the shell in, pull back out, load two more bags of separate bags of powder, then ram that in, and then you can fire the gun.
Yep. And mind you, all these little things, all these little itty bitty details, they accumulate, and they start to build up, and they build up and build up, and eventually the pile gets so tall that it destabilizes and starts collapsing.
Right.
And that's what's going on. And basically, you can look at this as another example of the very obvious collapse of the EU. We're looking at a financial system that can't hold it together. We're looking at countries that can barely fucking police themselves. We're looking at countries that are so reliant on welfare systems that Keir Starmer's coming out and talking about, oh, we have to cut back welfare spending so we can divert the money into military spending. You've got the very shoddy state of their equipment and their overall combat readiness. And again, these are the people talking about how they're going to go to war in Ukraine. And it's like, no, you're not, because you're just going to die. It's like, I don't care what you have to say. It's just gotten to the point where so many Europeans, and luckily there are European citizens that are taking notice, that they are actually realizing, like, wait, what the fuck happened?
Yeah.
But the problem is, from the perspective of the United States, is that we need need to treat the Europeans as enemies. The English, the French, and by extension of the French, the Germans, because the Germans on their own, honestly speaking, wouldn't be antagonistic to the United States. But because they're paired up with the French inside the EU, they are antagonistic towards the US. We need to look at these countries and be like, no, we're not your friends. You're going to sign the deals we lay on the table. We're not going to sign the deals you lay on the table. And if you don't like it, then you can go fucking shove it. And this, for the most part, is something like that is imperative, by the way. Like this isn't, something that we can roll out over the course of 20 years. No, this is something that needs to be rolled out within the next 10 at most, because of how imperative it is for us to understand that these people hate us. And Stoner posted a couple images for the example, talking about the tank rounds for the video. So make sure to include those just for fun shits and gigs.
All right.
But I actually kind of want to get into talking about Ukraine a little bit, because of how important this fulcrum point when it comes to the issue that the EU is, or the issues that the EU is having right now. Ukraine was a treasure trove, and I say was because they're not getting Ukraine back. Period. In a story. Ukraine was a treasure trove for the EU. The amount of natural resources, the amount of energy located in Ukraine that the EU would be able to exploit was massive, and thus, when it comes to losses, Western Ukraine doesn't matter to the EU.
It's Eastern
It's
Ukraine?
not where, or not Eastern Ukraine, Western Ukraine, my bad.
Right.
Western Ukraine does not matter to the EU. If anything, Western Ukraine would become a concentration camp for Ukrainians to prevent Ukrainians from entering the EU at large, because they're already having problems with Ukrainians in the EU as is.
What sort
Much
of problems?
Criminal activity. There's massive trafficking issues. Like, for example, if you go to the Netherlands, you know how in the Netherlands there's there's that one street in Amsterdam that's just basically full-blown brothels.
Yeah.
So there was a study done by I want to say it was United Way. It might have been somebody different, but I'm pretty sure it was United Way. But there was a study done, out of all the people working on this street, what are their nationalities? They had done multiple studies of this before, but what they had found is that the number of Ukrainians working on that street in Amsterdam had increased exponentially after the war started because of how many women have either fled or have been trafficked. And mind you, there's a lot of fucking trafficking. There's a lot.
Yeah.
The number of really pretty Ukrainian women that I've noticed in Ohio recently, for example, it's pretty high. It's pretty fucking high. Now, I say this because here in Ohio, there's a city called North Royalton. There's so many fucking Ukrainians in it, it's unfucking real. And so they're around a lot. Like, I do get to see them quite a bit when I go up to Cleveland.
Were they around before the war, or did they flee from Ukraine to the U.S. as well?
There were not nearly this many.
I thought all the Ukrainians mostly fled to like Poland and like other European countries. I didn't know they actually came here.
Yeah, the majority of them. But there were definitely enough that came over to the U.S. The majority of them ended up in the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. That's the highest numbers were in those three countries. Now, in the case of Belgium and the Netherlands, I'm 100% guarantee that most of them are involved in prostitution. Guarantee it. Well, when it comes to Belgium, it's obvious because a lot of people don't know this, but Brussels, you could honestly potentially call Brussels the prostitution capital of the world. It might not beat Washington, D.C., but I doubt it. But yeah, there's a lot of Ukrainians in France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. There's a lot of them.
Is it mostly all women, or like?
Yeah, women and children. Women and children. A lot of them. A lot. Now there are plenty of men, and that's where the hard criminal activity has been located. Like for example, like they're being very hush hush about it in Italy because the Italian deep state the Italian deep state is very pro EU because the Italian deep state sees the EU as a potential way to reform the Roman Empire. But the Italian deep state, Italy, they've been arresting Ukrainians ever since the mass exodus from the country. They've been arresting Ukrainians constantly on different charges like rape and muggings and stuff like that. Like they're massive arrests.
So they're doing
and of course,
things similar to like the Muslim migrants.
Yeah, for the most part. For the most part. Now, the whole thing is that they blend in better.
Right.
Because they're white, they do blend in better, and so they tend to go unnoticed. They tend, sometimes it tends to go unnoticed. Whereas, with an African, it's really easy to pick an African out in the crowd in a European country.
Yes.
So it's really easy for us to pick on the Africans when it comes to this shit. But, yeah, there's a lot of Ukrainians.
When an African is acting like an African in Europe, it's easy to notice. When a Ukrainian is just acting like a Ukrainian, it's a bit harder to notice.
Yeah. But yeah, so there's, the energy involved with Eastern Ukraine was supposed to be this huge golden ticket for the EU across the board. And now that they've been denied that golden ticket, the EU is flailing. They're freaking the fuck out because it's like, what do they have? They either start a war, or they get some sort of favorable trade deal, but the chances of them actually getting a favorable trade deal are slim to none.
Yeah.
To be completely frank.
Like, as we said before, but like with what people will they start this war with? They don't have militaries, and I don't think
Well,
the current European population is down to be drafted. That seems like a thing that would lead to wide scale rioting if they started attempting to draft people for a war with Russia.
oh, you mean like in the U.S. when they started talking about drafts and shit like that, and people fucking borderline fucking revolted immediately?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. No, and that's the thing is like no, like here in the U.S. for example, like we don't have a stomach for war anymore. Like the U.S. for example hasn't had a stomach for war in fucking God knows how long at this point in time. Like you look at the visceral reaction that everybody had towards Vietnam, and then you look at the feelings towards the global war on terror.
Mhm.
You know, it's actually really funny for me. A little bit of side tangent. I'm watching. Have you ever heard of the TV show SEAL Team?
No.
Okay, so the TV show follows a team of Navy SEALs. And these are full blown tier 1 guys. These are not special operations guys. These are literally the best guys in this is Dev Gru. These are the top dudes. And across the board, the TV show has a distinct message in it. Whether the message was intentional or not, the message exists. And the message is, don't go starting wars that you're not willing to go all the way with. And that's what I think the Europeans are threatening here, that they're going to try to pull a half-assed war, and they don't understand the calamitous fucking outcome that they're looking at. And I'll say it like this: if you're not willing, and this is my position personally, but I honestly think that history vindicates this. If you're not willing to walk into a house, blast a dude, and blast his son at the same time, you're looking for trouble down the road. Period. In a story. And that's why that's what I think the Europeans are going to be walking into, is that it's like, oh yeah, no, you can go ahead. You're going to kill some Russians for sure. You're going to kill some Russians. It's going to happen. But I don't think the Russians are going to let you off easy. I don't think they're going to let you off easy by any metric.
Right.
There was a little thing by Stoner in the side chat. I argue the only war Americans really want is a war with Mexico, just to stop the illegal aliens from coming here, human trafficking, and other shit the cartels are doing. Yes, absolutely. I 100% support a special forces style engagement in Mexico, where we just start hitting everything and forcing the cartels back on the defensive. If we were to just drop in and start hitting targets, oh yeah, and you wouldn't have to use a lot of forces to do it. You just can't use conventional army.
So because
hold on, he threw a second part in there. If the Euro quacks are wanting war with Russia and they get it, what's to stop them from dragging America into another European war? Because dude, there's a reason why I say no American blood for European soil. The sentiment of people towards a European war is zero. They don't care about it. They don't want it. And if they tried to instigate the American involvement in a European war, especially now, like, their chance went out the window with January 20th. January 20th, literally 11 days ago, cemented we are not getting involved in another European war for the next 4 years, and then more than likely the next 8 years after that.
Yeah, so to go back to the cartels for a moment, so what do you think that would look like in practice? Because I know the cartels are pretty heavily armed, and there's a lot, like, would this be something where there'd be a lot of losses on both sides, or would this be something where the special forces guys are just gonna like curb stomp them? How does this actually play out?
So it depends on the cartel in question. So something like the Sinaloas, for example, the Sinaloa cartel gets a lot of press because the Sinaloa cartel, if you don't know, the Sinaloa cartel is propped up by the CIA. Basically, the Sinaloas they get to run their businesses, but in in return, they basically sell out the other cartels. And so basically the devil you know kind of deal.
Right.
So there's the Sinaloas wouldn't be involved in this really. It just wouldn't be a thing. Now, I don't remember the other names of the cartels.
How about I remember one of the ones that popped up and was known for being excessively brutal was the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG. I know that one was getting a lot of press, not recently, but like 10 years or so ago for just killing everyone. But other than that, I don't know much more of the cartels.
Hold on, give me a second. So there is so there's how do I really explain it? So the thing with the cartels overall. So like for example, again, you have to understand something specific about all the different groups and whatnot. Is that each group has its different level of training, equipment, so on and so forth. And so different cartels are going to be easier to handle than others. And it just comes down to intelligence. Now, if you were to dedicate tier 1 assets, tier 2 assets, hell, even tier 3 assets, let's be frank, you could probably dedicate tier 3 assets and be perfectly fine. If you were to dedicate all those assets to just handling Mexico, you could probably run it up within a single administration. Say for example, say Trump doesn't give a fuck, for a lack of a better term, doesn't give a fuck because he's only one term period in a story, and he wants to show a result to the American people. If he was to just dedicate all these assets to this mission, he could probably handle it almost across the board within his 4 years in office. Now, the problem being is that you have a very long list of different groups. So let's, like for example, the Sinaloa cartel, again, there's a bunch of different branches of the Sinaloa cartel. So you have the main Sinaloa cartel, for example, and then you have its different branches. All these different little branches and whatnot. They're associated with the Sinaloas, but again, there's a lot of things going on across the board. And then you have the Gulf cartel, like Los Zetas, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I want to say it's Los Zetas. I can't remember exactly, but if it's the guys I'm thinking of, these guys are fucking brutal as shit. They're absolutely fucking crazy, basically. And then of course you have the New Generation Cartel.
Yeah.
Which those guys are absolutely fucking insane. And then you have the Juarez Cartel, which those guys, there's a reason why Juarez has such a reputation. Okay, Stoner, keep in mind fighting the cartels means at some point we'd have to fight the Mexican government eventually. Yes, unfortunately that would be the truth. But how long could you stave that off? Because here's the thing, and this is something that the Marina, the Mexican Marina, or the Mexican Marines, the Marina they're not on side with the government. Like, there is a distinct separation between them. So, honestly speaking, you could potentially see the Marina basically turn their backs on the government and being like, we're not doing this anymore. We're done. we want to fucking end this.
All right, but if at some point they're gonna have to fight Mexico, then why not just like go in all guns blazing at the first time at the beginning and just start drone striking the cartels and save the and say, not at risk losing actual competent tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 operators.
Well, so the issue there is twofold. One, drone striking shit doesn't confirm the kills. You unfortunately, if you look at what happened in Afghanistan, for example, they're like, oh, the guy's in the house, we can totally just take him out. Well, then it turns out, oh, there's a tunnel under the house that he went in and then left to another location via those tunnels. So the guy doesn't actually get killed. And then there's the collateral factor. Think about how many just innocent civilians you would kill. Because the cartels live amongst the civilian population. So if you just start dropping fucking hellfires everywhere and JDAMs everywhere, you're gonna kill a lot of civilians. And that's why it sucks, but you're gonna lose guys. That's just how it is.
But if you have a full-on war with Mexico, aren't you gonna start doing that anyways? Just because they have assets that need to be hellfired and JDAM'd, like in the normal course of fighting the war against like the Mexican government.
Well, if the Mexican government were to actually be like, oh hey, we're going to resist you, then yeah, sure. But at that point in time, the Mexican military has an option.
Right.
See, this is the whole point. And something that I pointed out in regards to the U.S. military when it came to Biden. If Biden actually let me rephrase that, not Biden, but Biden's administration.
Right.
If Biden's administration had done an inroad or what's the phrase I'm looking for? Whatever. Had they tried to undercut Joe Biden himself and get the U.S. plunged into a war in Ukraine, like they looked like they were trying to do, the U.S. military used their option of saying, we're not going to war. And the U.S. military, like basically all of the junior officers up to the middle officers, so everybody from lieutenant to colonel, basically the sentiment across the board was the same. No, we're not fighting a war because we can't fight a war. And all the generals were overridden basically through, oh, hey, if we try to actually get involved in this, we're going to have a mutiny on our hands.
Yeah. There's one other aspect where you're talking about going after the cartels in Mexico and where it might eventually wind up going against the Mexican government. It's not going to be all one-sided because how widespread are the cartels already inside the United States, and how many Mexicans and Central and South Americans are inside the United States illegally that might get pissed off and start doing terrorist attacks? That's one other aspect you need to look at as well. If it comes to that, actually going against not just the cartels, against the Mexican government, it is going to be bloody in more ways than one, and it's going to be bloody on U.S. soil as well.
Well, wouldn't that happen regardless if you start actively trying to go after the cartels? The cartel members in the U.S. are just going to start committing mass shootings and shit.
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. And this is why, for example, I tell people all the time, it's no, you need, there's a reason why I have a carbine in my trunk at all times. There's a reason why my car has become a rolling fucking armory for so long, is because in the event some shit actually fucking goes down in my immediate area, one, I can respond quickly because I'm never too far from my car, but also I always have a fucking gun on me. And at the end of the fucking day, it's okay, I might only take one or two with me, but I'm gonna be able to fucking do something in order to mitigate the fucking damage, even if I end up getting killed.
Right.
And that's the whole point, is that that's why I tell people all the time, it's like, no, you need to be thinking a lot higher order than just self-defense. You need to be thinking about the third order effect, self-offense. Because you need to be able to turn yourself into an operator very quickly if some shit actually fucking happens. And that's why training is so fucking direly needed within the American population across the board. This is why I have a coworker, for example. So yeah, I work security. The guy I'm talking about is with the contracting company that handles all the maintenance and all the contracting for the business that we are contracted to. And me and him were talking, and he is currently he's got what's that hyperfixation disorder that's kind of like ADD, ADHD, but it's like you become hyperly fixated on a topic and you follow
Asperger's?
that. No, that's
Autism?
no, it's not autism. It's a form of ADHD or ADD somewhere.
Asperger's.
No, it's not Asperger's. Fuck, I'm trying to remember what it's fucking called. But whatever. Anyways, back to the point. He's become hyper fixated on firearms the past past month and a half. And so I straight up told him, I'm like, okay, well, you bought all these parts, cool. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to go do this. Because he's got the mindset for it. He just needs to actually go get the training. He actually needs to put rounds down range, and he actually needs to get time behind the gun. And so, like, yes, the cartels are going to do shit. Like here in Ohio, for example, Akron, Ohio has a severe cartel problem. Youngstown, Ohio has a severe cartel problem. Cleveland, Ohio has a severe cartel problem. Columbus, Ohio has a severe cartel problem. Hell, Columbus, Ohio has Polaris Mall, for example. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but Polaris Mall is one of the largest sites in Ohio for the abduction of pregnant women. Pregnant women get abducted from Polaris Mall all the fucking time. And mind you, we're talking broad daylight abductions. We're not talking like, oh, it's, late in the day and shit. Like, no, there will be people abducted in broad fucking daylight.
And there will be... is this a place where there will be people around who will notice this? Or is it like, sparsely populated enough where... there will be on
50-50. It depends, because it's such a large complex. It depends on where you park.
Right.
Because they wait until you get to your car and then they hit you. So it depends on where you park. So the closer you are to the building, the better. The farther from the building you are, the more in danger you are. But that's the whole point, though, is that the overall sentiment should be, yes, the cartels, as soon as we start operating against them full bore, they're going to do shit here in the US, and we do have to be ready for it.
Yeah. Also, just curious, what is the actual difference between like an operator and just general infantryman or other general military personnel?
So you have what we refer to as line forces, and then you have special forces.
Right.
But special forces has different tiers. So you have tier 3. Think about it from this perspective: tier 3, tier 2, tier 1. Tier 3 special forces are effectively think the U.S. Army Rangers. They are a tier 3 force. They're good at what they do, but they're a force. They are a force in and of themselves, and there's several units like this. Now, then you have other forces like MARSOC, Raiders, Green Berets, and so on and so forth that are tier 2 units. Now, just because they're tier 2 units doesn't mean they're bad units. just because you're a tier 3 unit doesn't mean you're a bad unit. No, you're a fucking operator. You're just within a different strata within the operator tier list. And then tier 1 is basically reserved for DevGru and Ground Branch. Those are the 2 units that basically make up tier 1.
I've heard
Now,
of DevGru. What is Ground Branch?
Ground Branch is the armed detachment for CIA. Yeah, those the Ground Branch are the shooters for the CIA.
Huh.
Yeah. So if you hear about CIA potentially hitting a target, that was Ground Branch. Or they'll sometimes partner up with DevGru depending on the type of mission. DevGru specializes in high value target elimination, for example. That's their main specialty. Or high value target high value target elimination. Let's just go with that, because whether it's a person or it's a thing, they will blow it the fuck up. They will either shoot it dead or blow it the fuck up. Ground Branch is like super like clandestine shit that, you know, you're talking shit has to be off the books level shit. We're talking we're gonna go into a friendly country and operate against the will of that country. That's Ground Branch for the most part.
I see. And how many of those people would you say that there are currently? Because I assume it's not a large force that's gonna get there.
Hold on. I love how they still call it SEAL Team 6. SEAL Team 6 hasn't been a term in a long time. Out of SEAL Team 6, or DevGru has just over 1,300. Oh, okay, wait, these are 2014 numbers. So 1,350 personnel, which they probably have more by now. But yeah, DevGru, and then Ground Branch. There's probably no good intel on them whatsoever.
Right.
Hold on. See if I can get any. Yeah, yeah. Special Activity Center. Size classified.
Of course.
But yeah, you have the Special Operations Group, Political Action Group, you know, so on and so forth. Actually, it's really fun. It's really funny that we were all while I was looking up cartels, I stumbled upon U.S. crime organizations, and I found the Cleveland crime family, and so I'm reading up on them right now.
Interesting.
Hey, Warhound, I got a quick question for you while you're reading that up.
Go ahead.
Is it true that the U.S. government does not report any crimes that have been committed by illegal aliens, or they've been underreporting them?
Underreported, 100%. So overall, the incentive by law enforcement agencies has been to underreport illegal migrant crimes across the board. Because they're trying so desperately, the politicians, I should say, are trying so desperately to get people on board with an open border policy, or have been so desperate to get people on board with an open border policy, that if they were to report the true number of crimes being committed, then people would revolt. It's kind of like with the Epstein and Diddy case. I don't know if you guys remember this conversation that we had a while ago at this point, but the reason why the Epstein case didn't go anywhere past Ghislaine Maxwell was because the only tape that was ever produced of somebody doing something nefarious was by one person of Ghislaine Maxwell. And so that's why they were able to get Ghislaine Maxwell on charges because they actually had proof. It's the same thing with the Diddy case. The Diddy case, the only reason why Diddy has been arrested is because there's so much proof against him. And, that's why the Epstein case hasn't been prosecuted, because there is no proof. And so, no matter what, no matter how you feel about it, you can't prosecute something you don't have proof on. Well, that's the same thing with the illegal migration thing. If there's no proof of it, then you can't prosecute it. And so they underreport the crimes massively so. To the point where, like, for example, the number of murders committed by illegal migrants is quite high. But the problem is that either they don't get caught, or the illegal migrant is able to basically play dumb. And they know that they're going to get political cover, especially in places like Minneapolis and Chicago and LA and San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera.
Speaking of Chicago, have you seen what the government up there is trying to do to protect illegal aliens?
What?
Yes, I saw that post. But go ahead.
Yeah, from what I understand, the government in Illinois is trying to get it to where illegals can change their names and avoid deportation.
Huh. Sounds absurd.
Yeah, they don't want to give up their voters.
No. Honestly, it's probably not even voters. It's just like Well, you know how they determine how to appropriate house seats, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, it's by census, and it doesn't matter if you're legal or illegal. I don't think it's that they want voters. They want more favorable districts.
Oh, well, yeah, no, they want more. They want more bodies. So what it is it's a two-tiered attack. They want more bodies for the federal level stuff, because they want to be able to appropriate more seats to those specific states in order to be able to do that. And then on a local level and a state level, they can open the elections up to these people because they're allowed to do it, quote unquote. They're allowed to do it. And so they open up the elections, and thus it solidifies these places as strongholds for the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Well, here's my question, though. Won't those public officials and politicians get in hot water from this current administration and ICE for trying to run cover for illegal aliens and keep them from being deported?
It's possible. Whether or not it's likely, on the other hand, I'm not sure.
Well, okay, so here's the thing, is that look at Ilhan Omar, for example. Ilhan Omar has committed high crimes and misdemeanors.
Yeah.
She lied in order to get her brother from Somalia to the United States.
Yes.
And yet she's still in office. Now, will she survive Trump's second term? I don't think so. But she lied by marrying her brother to get him an expedited visa. We know this for a fact. The problem is that there are a lot of voters out there on the Democratic side who, Stoner, you remember the other day when I said that egalitarianism is for people that actually value egalitarianism?
I do.
Remember when I said that?
I remember.
These people do not value egalitarianism, because to value egalitarianism is to understand that egalitarianism has its limits. The problem is they don't value egalitarianism. They view egalitarianism as a method. They view it as a methodology. And they've gaslit their voters into the same mindset, where they view it as a methodology for being able to have power. And so their voters, they will never vote against it because it's a way for them to have power. Period. There's a reason, like, and I guess I'll get over California a little bit and we completely skipped over this because, I did mention in the beginning that California was a European psyop. The whole California seceding thing, Doc was right, 100%. It surfaces every few years as a means to attack an administration. But this time around, you notice how a lot of Europeans are posting things like, oh, maybe Mexico and Canada should divide up the United States and shit like that. And the whole purpose of that is to just attack the United States. So the secession movement of California is being astroturfed in order to make it look like there's an anti-US movement in the world, when in reality it's just a bunch of commies over in Europe that don't like the fact that we're not giving them cheap dollars anymore.
I want to say something, but I'm not sure if I should.
Well,
Worst case,
Dale?
I can bleep it out.
yeah, Dale can go ahead and censor that for you.
Okay, here it goes. Well, I hope these states do succeed. That way, so we can get our revenge on them and reconstruct them and see how they like it.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know,
California
maybe appoint a military governor over the blue states for a few generations and forcefully purge the bullshit out permanently.
Yeah, so California seceding would be good in that you could easily conquer it again and then strip it of its status as a state so that it can't vote. So that you take away like 60 house seats.
Well,
from...
I don't. And here's the thing: is when you say something like that to somebody like me who actually values egalitarianism, that's a no-go, bud. Because
Did you
it's
just not say that egalitarianism has its limits?
Well, that's the point, though, is I value egalitarianism and I understand those limits. Just wholesale fucking going hog wild on a state doesn't sit right with me. Sorry, I don't feel like being the next Sherman.
Right. No, I don't mean burn the state. Like. Yeah, I don't mean burn the state down. I mean just strip it of its voting power because they clearly.
And the whole point, the whole point is that they can't. The precedent has been set. Like nobody can leave the union. You can only join the union. Like that.
Exactly,
That precedent was set. Period. In a story. Now, mind you, by the way, again, the British and the French supported the Confederacy. The Confederacy wasn't wrong in its mindset of the federal government can't tell us what to do. What it was wrong in, it was that it was taking the backing of powers that wanted to use them as leverage. Now, the whole thing being that at the end of the fucking day, again, I have the mentality of it's like, you know what? I'm cool with adding Canada and Mexico to the country and proceeding to completely wipe out their governments and remove any sense of parliamentarianism from them as we can. Because as I said the other day, parliamentarian governments are literally the bane of everybody's existence.
Yes.
Every bit.
Well, yeah, Canada should definitely be added to the U.S., but as a territory, not a state. Because if it's added as a state, you basically have California number 2.
Well, no, because in reality, let's actually break it down by the numbers. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba would be just like any other. Basically, they'd be Ohio number 2, 3, and 4. Ottawa would be California 2.0, but Ottawa would be very hard pressed to actually have an effect on the overall country because at the end of the day, it's Ottawa.
Well, you'd have BC, you'd have Ontario, and you'd have Quebec, which would basically be California 2.0.
Well, actually, I don't have that kind of opinion about the Quebecois.
You don't? Like,
No, I don't.
all right,
Because the Quebecois value their sovereignty.
true, but
And so,
they also value other states giving them all the money, which they do. Quebec is the largest recipient of the. So in Canada, basically, the states that produce the most wealth pay the states that produce the least. They're called equalization payments, and Quebec is the largest beneficiary of equalization payments. Because all the rich states, all the rich provinces send a whole bunch of money to Quebec every year, because without that money, Quebec would collapse into a failed socialist hellhole because of all the retarded policies it has.
Well, that sounds like retarded policies within the financial system of Canada. But let's be real. There's a lot of those across the fucking board.
Right.
For example, and I guess we'll kind of touch on the United States as well a little bit. Do you know the Fed funds rate?
No.
All right, so oh my God, hold on, ow, fuck, sorry. So the Fed funds rate. So, do you know why states like Missouri and Mississippi and so on are so poor?
Because they're mostly agrarian, would be my guess.
No. The reason why they're so poor is because they cannot get they cannot get loans at the rates that they should be getting. So, like, for example, the Fed's funds rate right now is 4.5%. Well, why should Mississippi, for example, pay 4.5% when in reality it should probably pay around 1.5–2%? Whereas a place like California, for example, given the current metrics, should be paying, 6%? Because at the end of the day, what this is, and it's the same reason why people talking about, oh, the rich should pay their fair share. The problem is that you start taxing the rich more, that taxation flows downward. It's basically a yield curve.
Yeah.
It flows downward. And so at the end of the fucking day, if you start trying to tax the rich more, you're going to inevitably tax people that are making less more. The rich people can eat the taxes. The people who are making less can't. So how many people do you put out of their houses? How many people do you put out of their businesses, et cetera, et cetera? And the number is a lot higher than people want to fucking acknowledge. Again, communists will be communists. They don't care. They just want to burn the world down.
Right.
But that's the whole point. It's the same concept with the Fed funds rate. Now, mind you, who's responsible for making the Fed funds rate universal across the board? Because, by the way, the Fed's fund rate used to be variable. The Fed's fund rate was different between all 6 districts of the Federal Reserve.
When did that change? And who changed it?
Well, who's the guy who took us off the gold standard?
Nixon. This is another Nixon.
Yeah, it's another Nixon moment.
Fucking Nixon.
Wasn't a bad guy, just fucking played dumb hands.
Yes.
If he was a poker player, I would run roughshod over him on the table. Like, I'm just saying. Like, he makes some bad plays. And then Mitch is sitting over there and he's like, yeah, I grew up in the era in which Nixon had just gotten rid of, and I had to live through Jimmy Carter, and I had to live through Reagan, and he's just sitting there like, we love you, Mitch.
The old gray man, he ain't what he used to be, ain't what he used to be, ain't what he used to be.
Did Mitch fall asleep?
No.
Dad's asleep.
Say, Mitch, how'd you like growing up with Jimmy Carter?
It was
Hey,
interesting.
Mitch, tell us how
especially
much
with-
you love the Long Beach.
Oh, he left.
I did not mean for that to happen.
What is the Long Beach?
Oh, the Long Beach. Oh God, the Long Beach. Okay, so let's have some fun. Let's have some fun for the end. What timestamp are we at?
All right, we are currently at 2 hours and 43 seconds.
Okay. So let's tie it off with a really fun one. So the Long Beach. So let me so the USS Long Beach. It was I believe it was the only cruiser of its class. Yes. Okay. So yeah, it was 100% the only cruiser of its class. I'm gonna post the wiki link in side chat real quick. So the Long Beach was an attempt to create a nuclear powered guided missile cruiser.
Mhm.
And the problem with the Long Beach is that it was prohibitively expensive, like horrendously expensive to build. And it was a proof of concept, and the proof of concept failed. It's also the ugliest son of a bitch on the fucking water.
Yeah, it does look pretty ugly.
Because
I think I might have accidentally upset Mitch, and that was not my intention.
yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Well, I'll message him here in a bit. He probably bailed because he was just like, oh dear fucking god, he brought this boat up again. But what was funny about the Long Beach is because of the nuclear reactor, they needed a way to shield the crew as best as they could, and so it has this box on top of it, on the superstructure, that's shielded against the radiation. And so it just looks absolutely retarded. It's the most stupid looking ship on
So
the water.
is that what the thing in the middle is? That's the box?
Yeah, that's the box. It's just the most ridiculous looking thing ever. And its sea handling
And
was...
the Enterprise, the nuclear Enterprise, its bridge superstructure was box shaped as well.
Yes, because it was from the same era as the Long Beach. So it was a very funny ship. It was a very funny ship, and you know, its seaworthiness was not bad but not good. It wasn't. It was a ship that everybody was like, okay, we built it, we tested, we kept it. You know, it served from the 50s to the 90s. It saw its day, and you know, whatever. But it definitely wasn't something that the Navy was going to pursue past that.
Quick question.
I wonder which
just
does
from-
Mitch hate the most, the Long Beach or the Zumwalt?
Oh, definitely the Zumwalt. Definitely the Zumwalt.
What is the Zumwalt?
The Zumwalt
It's
is
an
an
ass ugly naval attempt at a stealth destroyer that turned out to be nothing but a motherfucking money pit, a waste of
okay.
taxpayer dollars and resources.
Okay. So to explain it in a more concise fashion, the Zumwalt class was a pair of quote unquote stealth destroyers, where they stealth. Debatable. There's been some talk and some leaks about how its radar cross section was not nearly what they expected, and there were definitely some problems with it. That was designed to be basically the future of destroyers within the U.S. Navy. It fell flat. It fell flatter than a pancake. It was bad. It was bad.
Here's a question.
But
what is uglier, those ships or the littoral combat ship?
don't make me pick this. Don't make me pick this. Don't make me do it.
Give me a minute,
my
and I'll send a picture of the Zoom wall.
All right.
Don't make me pick that because it's no, that's not a decision I can make. They're all ugly as fuck. They're all
Yes.
ugly as sin.
Like,
It's bad.
and I'm gonna make sure to include this image in the thing. But what the fuck is this? Oh, Stoner beat me to it. What the fuck is that?
The USS
That is a
Independence.
littoral combat
Yes.
ship.
I am aware.
That's the what is the
That's the
Enterprise.
Independence.
Oh, the Independence.
Yeah, that's the Independence.
Oh, the fuck does that even look like?
It's so the whole concept of a littoral combat ship is that it can go into littoral reefs and shit like that, and it's able to go into those shallow areas.
Yeah.
The problem is that instead of creating a combat ship, they tried to create a jack of all trades, master of fucking nothing. And they're just garbage. They're terrible. There's a reason why they haven't built any new ones.
Fair enough.
There's a reason.
Yeah.
And then yes, the Zumwalt. Oh god, it's so bad. Oh, I forgot how ugly these things were.
Damn.
Oh, they're
Actually,
so bad.
The one you posted, that's the Zumwalt. I think that looks like an uglier version of the littoral combat ship, honestly.
Oh, it's so bad.
It's the same
here,
ugly. It's the same type of ugly, but there's just like less features of it.
well, and here's the thing about the Zumwalt. So you see those two pods on the front there?
Yeah.
So those are the gun pods. So those retract and they reveal the guns. And the whole concept of those guns was they were these rapid fire 5-inch 5-inch rapid fire guns that were meant to be just fucking heads and spades across the board better than the current system that the U.S. Navy was using. The problem was the gun system didn't work at all, and so they took the gun systems off of both of the Zumwalts.
Right.
And they've only been doing sea trials. They haven't even done weapons testing on the Zumwalt because it's a waste of fucking time because the guns suck so bad.
I got something I want to say about the LCS that Vog posted.
Yeah.
It looks like a retarded shark that got exposed to nuclear radiation.
I can see it.
Oh my god, that's funny.
Oh, so the Zumwalt was actually a recent ship as well. Why do they make these recent-looking ships look so like? I don't know how to describe it, but why do they
Go
make
ahead,
them so
say
flat?
it. Go ahead, say it. They look ass ugly. They are
Yes.
ass
But I mean,
ugly.
They look ass ugly in a very specific way, right? In
Well,
much the
okay,
same way. It's like
so-
very flat.
Again, the Zumwalt was meant to have a smaller overall radar cross section. The problem was it didn't end up having a smaller radar cross section. It's kind of like with the F-35. The F-35, they're like, oh, the radar cross section of the F-35 is the size of a piece of paper, and then it turns out actually it's more like the size of a fridge. And it's like, okay, come on, like I'm not gonna give you too much shit because it's only that big, but it's not as small as you tried to claim it was. And mind you, there were documents leaked that proved that the F-35, like its radar cross section, was a lot bigger than people were led to believe. The same thing with the Zumwalt. Like the Zumwalt, it has a smaller radar cross section, but not much smaller. And is that a Oliver Hazard Perry? I think that's an Oliver Hazard Perry. That's an Oliver Hazard Perry. I like you.
Looks a lot less ugly than the last.
The Oliver Hazard Perry class, the best frigates that the U.S. Navy ever put into service.
Make U.S. Navy ships pretty again.
Actually, I'll be completely honest. The Oliver Hazard Perry is the ugly dog. It's the pug of the U.S. Navy roster. Now they decommissioned all of them, but it was the pug. It was ugly as sin compared to other ships like the Ticonderoga and whatnot. But The thing
Uh,
was, the Oliver Hazard Perry did fucking work. The only problem, do you know why they got rid of the Oliver Hazard Perry?
Right.
Because they didn't want to spend the money to refit the ships with the new SAM launcher. So you see that little spindly thing on the front there?
Yeah.
And I not SAM launchers, the anti-ship launchers. So that thing on the front there, that's the anti-ship missile launcher. And they came out with a new version of it that allowed it to fire, I think it's either 2 missiles or 4 missiles. I don't remember how many. But they came out with a new version of the launcher, but it was found that they would have to do a major refit to all the Oliver Hazard Perry class frigates in order to fit this new launcher on it. And they said, you know what, fuck it, just get rid of them. We'll just do the VLS tubes on the Arleigh Burke, and we'll leave it at that, so on and so forth. The problem is the Arleigh Burke can't do what the Oliver Hazard Perry is meant to do, and that's be a distraction and be an escort. Because the Arleigh Burke is just way too fucking big. It's too big for its fucking mission profile. It's like the Arleigh Burke is a great ship if you use it for what it's intended for, which is a quick attack vessel. It's meant to get in, start dumping VLS, and just fucking raining hell on people, and then running the fuck away. Not the Oliver Hazard Perry. The Oliver Hazard Perry is meant to be in front of everything, skidding around like a fucking madman, and just shooting everything down as it tries to come in at the fleet. The Arleigh Burke is not suited for that. Which is why they kept the Ticonderogas, because the Ticonderogas are better at shooting shit down than the Arleigh Burkes. But the Ticonderogas are meant to be line ships. They're not meant to be escorts necessarily. They're meant to actually get into the fight. And so if the Ticonderogas are busy escorting the bigger boats like the LHS, is that the destination for the landing assault ships? And the carriers and whatnot, the Ticonderogas aren't doing their job. So, what can you do?
How much firepower does one of those Arleigh Burke, like, how much hell can they rain down on things?
Oh, that, if I remember correctly, they've got like, I want to say it's around 70 VLS tubes. Hold on. So they, of course, it's got the 5-inch gun, and then it's got the 2 Phalanx Sea-Wiz systems. But after a certain point, all the Arleigh Burkes only had 1. And then for missiles, 90 cells. So they have 90, 90 or 96 VLS tubes.
What is a VLS tube? Is that like
vertical launch system? So yeah, they can fucking just rain hell. But the problem is once a VLS is used, you can't reload it except out of combat.
Does it take too long to reload, or?
You need a crane.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, a resupply ship will come along, alongside the vessel, will then crane the missiles into the VLS tubes. So you can only do it out of combat. And mind you, the Arleigh Burke is a great looking ship. Like
yeah.
Here, let me get this image for you. Like, they're great looking ships. They're fucking beautiful. Probably some of the best looking ships on the fucking sea. And then let me grab a picture of the Ticonderogas. The Ticonderoga is my favorite ship on the in the U.S. Navy right now. I love the Ticonderogas. These things look mean.
That is true.
They look mean. And mind you, the thing about the Ticonderogas is that the Ticonderogas on top of, I believe they have more VLS tubes. Yeah, they have 120. Yeah, they have 122. Oh wait, no, they have. Oh yeah, 100. It's two missiles per cell. That's what it is. So yeah, they have 122 missiles that they can put out, while also having the two 5-inch guns, while also having their other ship anti-ship weaponry alongside having the extra sea whizzes. So yeah, they do exactly what a cruiser is meant to do. They are meant to get in the fight.
Right. Which ship class, as of now, do you think has the most hell it can rain down in the quickest amount of, like, which one can just dump the most shit on the enemy, as far as ordnance goes? So not counting like aircraft carriers, which can just like,
Well, so if we're talking what the actual, like, just raw firepower,
Yeah.
the Ticonderogas, pound for pound, they're going to be able to put down the most hate.
I see.
Because they're larger ships, so they have more room for more shit.
Right.
But there's only 9 of them left in service. They retired the other 18.
Are they the biggest ships currently, non-aircraft carrier ships? That the
Yes.
US.
Yes.
Is
Yeah,
there a reason why they don't have ships bigger than cruisers anymore?
Well, because battleship. So the problem is technology. So technology changes. We all know this.
Yeah.
The problem is that ships the size of a battleship are considered obsolete because they're easier to hit. This is where the concept of what is called the arsenal ship comes into play. The arsenal ship concept is you literally have a ship that's nothing but fucking launch tubes.
Right.
And the whole concept is that it rolls into an AO and it just starts dumping fucking missiles. The problem with the arsenal ship is its overall seaworthiness was terrible because it just couldn't sail properly. And so there was a lot of issues with the concept. Arsenal ships, they were going to be, if you did the math correctly, they would basically have been a light battle cruiser kind of deal, or like a heavy cruiser.
Right.
But again, the concept never really went anywhere. It's kind of like with the Alaskas. In the case of the United States, the Alaska class was meant to be the preeminent battle cruiser design. But the problem is that the fast battleship design, the USS or the North Carolina class and the Iowa class, had usurped the need for battle cruisers at that point in time. So they only ever built, I think they built 2 Alaskas, or only 1. I don't remember. I think it was 2. It might have only been 1. I don't remember exactly.
Do you think it would be possible to make a arsenal ship that is able to just traverse the waters better, or that just does not have those limitations?
Modern day maybe. Back in the 80s when they were first playing around with the idea of the arsenal ship, probably not. And there you go. There's a concept of the arsenal ship. And as in those black squares on the deck, those are just VLS banks.
So it can just like dump it can just dump missiles on a target.
Oh yeah. The whole point was this thing rolls into the AO and just starts dumping missiles fucking everywhere. And the whole point is that you would attach one to a carrier strike group. The arsenal ship would basically get in closer, would just start dumping missiles into the air while the aircraft are going in and doing their thing, and so on and so forth. And then all those little turrets on there were SAM launchers, so it could also act as a heavy escort because it just had so many SAMs on it. It could just shoot down whatever the fuck was coming in.
Right.
But The overarching problem being that, again, its seaworthiness was very compromised.
Also, I'm guessing with so many missiles on it, if it got hit by something explosive, would it be safe to assume the whole thing would just blow up?
Any ship would blow the fuck up. Like ships. So back in the day, so back in like the World War II era, ships were designed to take a hit.
Right.
Whereas nowadays, ships are not designed to take a hit. Period. In a story. Like they just can't. And just to specify real quick, if anybody is curious, because again, the Arsenal ship never a hull a hull never actually got laid for it. The seaworthiness test that I'm referring to is model seaworthiness. So there's a testing lab where they'll build the models of ships in relative scale, where it's like, okay, you pick the fucker up and it's like 50 pounds and shit like that. Like these are hulking fucking models.
Right.
And in those tests, in laboratory tests, those models were just not seaworthy. They just weren't. They just couldn't balance the weight properly to make it so it could handle rough seas properly, because that's an important thing when operating out in the big blue.
Right.
It's kind of like, not tying down an aircraft on an aircraft carrier in rough seas. All of a sudden, that aircraft is whee, over the side. Jet overboard. All right, I think we've drawn on long enough. I think we've had enough fun.
Yeah.
Europe sucks, and boats are cool. Fuck, I let's face it, boys, we're autistic. I'm throwing in the towel at this point in time. We're fucking autistic. Anyways, we'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one.